Sarah Mitchell's hands were shaking before she even reached the front door of Whitmore Industries, not from the cold October wind sweeping through downtown Chicago, but from a memory that had surfaced without warning. The memory of her mother's voice years earlier, telling her that the world would often test her heart before it ever tested her mind. And that morning, standing on that sidewalk, she had no idea just how true those words were about to become. 7 other candidates stood scattered near the entrance of the glass tower, each one clutching folders thick with credentials, each one silently rehearsing answers to questions they believed would decide their futures, unaware that the real interview had already begun the moment they stepped out of their cars. Sarah was 29, dressed in a blazer she had bought secondhand and altered herself late one night with a needle and thread. And though she carried a business degree from a modest state college rather than an Ivy League name, she carried something far heavier and far more valuable, a memory of hunger, of being looked at with pity by strangers, of watching her mother return home every night smelling of bleach and exhaustion after cleaning other people's offices so that her daughter could one day sit in a room like the one she was about to enter. As she walked toward the building, she noticed a small girl sitting alone near the bus stop, no older than 7, her sneakers worn thin at the toes, and beside her on the pavement lay a folded $20 bill that had clearly slipped from someone's pocket unnoticed. Sarah slowed instinctively, though she was already anxious about being late, and she crouched down and asked the child gently if the money belonged to her. And when the girl shook her head, Sarah did not hesitate. She asked a nearby shopkeeper if anyone had come looking for lost money, and when no one claimed it, she placed it carefully into the small child's hand and told her to give it to her mother, that some kind stranger out there would want her to have it, rather than a stranger who might never notice it missing. She did not know that a small camera mounted discreetly above the bus stop had captured the entire exchange, streaming quietly into a private office where a woman had been watching every candidate that morning with careful, practiced eyes. Inside the building, the other applicants hurried past a janitor named Walter Higgins, a heavy-set man in his 60s with tired eyes and a voice that carried warmth even in a simple greeting. And one by one they passed him without so much as a glance, some scrolling through their phones, others rehearsing their opening lines under their breath. Bradley Cross, sharply dressed in a tailored navy suit that had cost more than his mother's monthly rent growing up, though he rarely spoke of that anymore, stepped around Walter's mop bucket with visible irritation, muttering that he could have ruined his shoes, and he did not notice the flicker of hurt that crossed the old man's face before it disappeared behind decades of practiced patience. Sarah, however, stopped to read the small name tag on Walter's uniform, and she greeted him by name and asked how his morning was going, and thanked him for keeping the floors so clean, and something in the way she looked at him, not through him, but directly at him, made his tired eyes soften into a smile he had not worn in days. What none of the candidates knew was that Walter was not simply a janitor hired for the day. He was a retired accountant and an old friend of the company's founder, brought in quietly as part of a test that had been designed months earlier to reveal the character of the people who wished to lead others. As the candidates gathered in the lobby, a disheveled woman entered through a side door, her clothes wrinkled, her gray hair unkempt, her eyes carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who had not eaten in some time, and she approached the group timidly, asking if anyone might have a spare dollar or a piece of food to share, explaining softly that she had not eaten since the previous morning. Most of the candidates looked away uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in their phones. And Diane Foster, a sharp young woman with a law degree and an even sharper tongue, laughed under her breath and told the woman that this was a professional building and that she should try somewhere else, her tone cutting enough to make the woman flinch and lower her eyes in humiliation. But Sarah, who had grown up watching her mother stretch a single loaf of bread across an entire week without ever once complaining, felt something rise in her chest she could not ignore. And she reached into her bag and pulled out the sandwich she had packed that morning, the only meal she had prepared for a long day of interviews, and she placed it gently into the woman's hands along with the last few dollars in her wallet, telling her there was no need to explain herself, that everyone deserved kindness regardless of circumstance. The woman's eyes glistened as she whispered her thanks, and for a brief moment their hands touched, one offering, one receiving, and neither of them yet understood the weight of what had just occurred, because the woman was not a stranger who had wandered in off the street. She was Eleanor Whitmore, the 71-year-old founder and CEO of the very company they had all come to work for, a woman who had built her empire from nothing after growing up in poverty herself, raised by a father who lost his job during a recession and a mother who took in sewing work late into the night to keep her children fed. Eleanor had begun this tradition years earlier, quietly testing every group of finalists for senior leadership positions, not because she distrusted people by nature, but because she believed with everything in her heart that competence without compassion was a dangerous thing to hand power to, and that a company was only ever as strong as the character of the people who ran it. When the candidates were finally called into the boardroom, they filed in one by one, straightening ties and smoothing skirts, ready to recite achievements from carefully polished resumes, and they froze when they saw, seated at the head of the long mahogany table, not a stranger, but the very woman some of them had dismissed on the sidewalk that morning. No longer wearing wrinkled clothes, but a tailored charcoal suit. Her silver hair pulled back neatly, her expression calm and unreadable. Beside her sat Walter Higgins, no longer holding a mop, but a folder embossed with the company insignia, and the room fell into a silence so heavy it seemed to press against the walls. Eleanor began to speak, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of decades of hard-earned wisdom, telling them that the interview they believed was about to begin had, in truth, already concluded, that every choice they made from the moment they stepped onto that sidewalk had been quietly observed, not out of trickery for its own sake, but because she needed to know who they truly were beneath their interview clothes and their rehearsed answers. She told them that anyone could speak eloquently about leadership and integrity for the span of 30 minutes, but that character reveals itself most honestly in the moments when a person believes no one of consequence is watching. Diane Foster's face went pale as Eleanor gently recounted how she had spoken to a hungry woman, not knowing that woman held the very future of the company in her hands, and Diane's carefully composed expression cracked, her eyes filling with tears she fought hard to blink away. Bradley Cross stared down at his shoes, the same shoes he had been so eager to protect from a janitor's mop bucket. And for the first time that day, he said nothing at all, because there was nothing he could say. Eleanor turned to Sarah, who sat quietly at the far end of the table, her heart pounding, uncertain whether she was about to be praised or dismissed along with the others. And Eleanor told her that she had watched her return a stranger's money to a lost child without hesitation, greet a janitor with the same respect she might offer a senator, and give away her only meal to a woman she believed was suffering, expecting nothing in return, not recognition, not gratitude, not advancement. Sarah felt tears gathering behind her eyes as she listened, and she thought suddenly of a night many years earlier when she was 12 years old and had asked her mother, half asleep at the kitchen table, why she always gave their neighbors food, even when there was barely enough for the two of them. And her mother had touched her cheek gently and said that kindness was never something you could afford to run out of, that it was the one thing that multiplied the more you gave it away. And Sarah had carried those words quietly in her chest every day since, never once expecting them to matter to anyone but her. She told Eleanor, her voice trembling but sincere, that she had not done any of it to be seen or rewarded, that she had simply tried to treat people the way her mother had always tried to treat people, with the belief that everyone deserved to be seen as human first, regardless of what they had or did not have. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning, and even Bradley, who moments earlier had seemed irritated and dismissive, now looked at Sarah with something like shame and quiet respect stirring behind his eyes. Eleanor rose slowly from
chair and announced that the position would be offered to Sarah, not because her resume outshined the others on paper, though it was strong in its own right, but because she had proven, in moments no one had told her mattered, that she possessed the kind of character that could not be taught in business school and could not be faked under pressure. The other candidates sat in stunned silence, some ashamed, some quietly relieved that the truth had finally been spoken aloud. But Eleanor was not finished, and she turned to the group who had failed the hidden tests and asked them a single question: whether they believed people were capable of changing once they understood where they had gone wrong. Diane Foster broke first, her composure finally crumbling, admitting through tears that she had grown up believing success meant proving herself sharper and harder than everyone around her, that an old wound from being mocked for wearing second-hand clothes as a child had convinced her that kindness was a weakness rather than a strength, and she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, if there was any way left to make things right. Bradley spoke next, his voice thick and unsteady, admitting that he had spent so many years chasing the approval of a father who measured worth only in promotions and salaries, that he had never once stopped to consider that the janitor he stepped around that morning might carry more wisdom in his heart than an entire boardroom of executives. It was Sarah who answered them, surprising herself, saying that she did not believe people should be defined forever by their worst moment, especially not a moment born from old fear and old wounds, rather than true cruelty. And she gently suggested that Eleanor consider giving the other candidates a genuine second chance, not for the same position, but for roles where they might learn, under proper mentorship, what she herself had learned from a mother who had nothing and still gave everything. Eleanor studied her for a long moment, her eyes glistening with something that looked like pride, and said that this, more than anything else that had happened that day, confirmed she had chosen correctly, because true leadership was not simply about possessing good character, but about extending grace to those still finding their way toward it. She agreed on the spot to create a mentorship program within the company, one where Diane, Bradley, and the others would be given a genuine opportunity to grow under careful guidance, learning not just the skills of management, but the deeper lessons of humility and empathy no classroom had ever taught them. Walter Higgins, still holding his folder, smiled the same gentle smile he had offered every person who passed him that morning, and told the room quietly that he had learned long ago, after losing everything once in his own life before rebuilding it slowly, that the measure of a person is never in how they treat those who can reward them, but in how they treat those who cannot.
As the meeting came to a close, Sarah stepped out of the building into the late afternoon light, her heart full in a way she had never quite experienced before, not because she had won a coveted position, though that mattered deeply to her, because she had been reminded, in the most unexpected way, that the quiet values her mother had instilled in her, without ever demanding recognition, had turned out to be the very things the world needed most. She thought of her mother's tired hands after long nights of cleaning, her mother's steady insistence that kindness was never wasted, even when it went unnoticed. And she felt, walking down that crowded sidewalk among strangers who had no idea what had just happened inside that glass tower, that somewhere her mother's quiet sacrifices had finally been seen, even if it took a stranger's test to reveal them. In the months that followed, Sarah rose within the company not because she chased power, but because she continued to lead the way she always had, with compassion as her compass. And the mentorship program she had suggested became one of the most respected initiatives in the company's history, transforming careers and, more importantly, the character of everyone who passed through it, including Diane and Bradley, who in time became two of the most trusted and humble leaders the company had ever known. And somewhere, on quiet mornings, Eleanor Whitmore still walked the sidewalks near her own company in worn clothing, not because she needed the disguise anymore to test the hearts of strangers, but because she never wanted to forget what it felt like to be unseen. And because she believed, until her final days, that the truest wealth a person could carry was not measured in dollars, but in the quiet, unwitnessed choice to be kind when no one was watching at all. If this story touched something in your heart today, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the Kind Souls Stories for more heartfelt journeys about compassion, integrity, and the quiet strength of doing what is right, even when no one is looking. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story that reminds you why kindness still matters in this world. This story teaches that true character reveals itself in unwitnessed moments, that empathy and integrity outweigh credentials and appearances, that people deserve dignity, regardless of circumstance, and that forgiveness paired with mentorship can transform failure into lasting growth rather than permanent judgment. It encourages viewers to practice quiet, consistent kindness, not for recognition, but because it reflects who they truly are.